Greetings from CBC Studio A to our tens of listeners from coast to coast, and welcome to another episode of Discernment Digest, where we seek to help you think better about less by applying precepts and principles of God's truth to the affairs of everyday life, and also look at contemporary events from a biblical perspective in an effort to model discernment and how we assess what is happening. Now, it's been a while since we've taken news items and sought to model discernment in the way we look at those, because the last few weeks have been devoted to a single issue each that took up all of the time. So today will be a kind of smorgasbord of issues with some needed comic relief after that, and then we'll end with a look at the important issue of who Christians should go to for expertise and how we should look at the contributions of non-Christians to all areas of such expertise, asking the question, does your surgeon need to be a Christian? I'll begin with one approach to voting that some believe, including me, would reduce the number of fringe candidates who win in our primaries, when only about 20% of the electorate votes at that time in the primaries, and then we're stuck in the general election with undesirable choices. The solution proposed by some, and I tend to agree with it, is something called ranked choice voting. The idea is this, try to follow along. A state would use a single open primary where every candidate appears on the same ballot, and the top, say, 4 vote-getters then advance to the general election. Then the state uses ranked choice voting in the general election to pick the ultimate winner from those finalists. So the way it would go is you have the 4, and you would vote for all 4, but you would rank them from your first choice, 1, second choice, 2, 3, and 4. And so let's say you have 4 candidates from 4 different parties running in that general election then. And I saw this put together in comic form where the major parties are, first of all, the complete scumbag party, and then they show policies for each of the parties as they relate to their handling of puppies. So you have the complete scumbag party, and its policy toward puppies is to kick puppies. And then you have the discreet scumbag party, and their policy is to put puppies to work. Then you got a minor party and an independent party. The independent party's policy is to have televised puppy torture. And then you have the minor party called the nice party, and their policy is to hug puppies. Now, you can vote for the discreet scumbags in order to defeat the complete scumbags, and you can still vote for a minor party or independent if we were to do it this way. Now, to win a seat, a candidate has to end up with an absolute majority, not a plurality. So that is, they have to get over 50% of the total votes. So imagine your electorate has just 100 voters. So the winner would need 51 at least in order to win. To win a seat, a candidate has to get that absolute majority of whatever the number of voters is, in this case, say 100. All right, so you've got in the first round of the voting, you would vote for all 4, and you would rank your choices. And the one that comes in last gets the least amount of votes. Then they're eliminated, and whatever number of votes they received, now that's eliminated, but now those go to the second and your number 2 choice. And so now those number 2 choices go to each of the 3 remaining candidates. Now, if still no one has an absolute majority of 51 or more, then the last place at that point, in third, would be eliminated, and then the votes for third place would go to the remaining 2. And so basically, here's how it would work. If my first choice doesn't win, my second choice gets counted as my first choice, and so on. And that's exactly the way it would go and play out. Now, part of the reason that I got interested in ranked choice voting was because it was advocated by Dr. Jonathan Sarfati. Now, you may remember that Dr. Sarfati is a genius, literally. Remember, he is the Christian who is also a scientist, and he's the former New Zealand national chess champion. He played world chess champion Boris Spassky to a draw, and he has played chess against a couple dozen others at the same time while blindfolded. Now, one of the other issues on which Dr. Sarfati is very, very knowledgeable is the efficacy of vaccines. And he commented recently on something that was posted by Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. He said this: Dr. Fauci was concerned in January of 2021 that the second dose of the COVID shot, quote, theoretically could be associated with miscarriage in the first trimester. And then he says, Senator Rand Paul and I released the text between Anthony Fauci, Rochelle Walensky, and Vivek Murthy, and then along with some statistics that supposedly prove, now get this, that there was an 82% miscarriage rate for women who got that second COVID vaccine while pregnant. But community notes on social media pointed out that 82% miscarriage figure uses an invalid denominator. The New England Journal of Medicine study noted that it could not calculate miscarriage risk for early exposure participants because 905 of the 1,224 lacked follow-up data. A later analysis of the same registry found a 14.1% rate, which is within historical norms. Dr. Sarfati commented, that 82% figure is not of all pregnancies, but of all pregnancies that ended in the first trimester. In reality, it shows that the vaccinated women did not miscarry any more than women in general. Another doctor said of this 82% number, listen, it's good to use critical thinking before saying or tweeting things. An 82% miscarriage rate from COVID vaccines would mean U.S. births would collapse. They rose in 2021, and they nudged up a little in 2022. He said the number is fake. Yet another doctor said miscarriage rate, if you have a COVID vaccine in pregnancy, is about 12%. And the miscarriage rate, if you do not have a COVID vaccine in pregnancy, is about 12%. No difference. Now, the next few items have to do with real or potential corruption in government, some about which Christians in particular should be sensitive, since we know the sinful nature of humanity, and therefore we also know the need for restraint on those in power. A new Justice Department Office of Legal Counsel memo says the president can assert executive privilege over communications with, quote, private advisors, so long as they relate to official presidential decision-making, involve or reflect communications with the president or his direct advisors, and are confidential. Now, that Office of Legal Counsel opinion extends that shield to the president's direct advisors' communications with private citizens, too. Now, that's important because when, probably not if, the Democrats get back in power this coming January in the Congress, they're going to want to investigate and subpoena a number of individuals related to this administration's actions, including actions facilitated by a man named Boris Epstein. He's not related to Jeffrey Epstein. Boris Epstein, who was in the first Trump administration from 2016 to 2020, But he has served it from outside in this new term, including his work in getting law firms to pony up hundreds of millions of dollars toward causes supported by the president. The Trump administration utilized executive orders and threats of federal contracting bans to pressure prominent law firms into settlements. Rather than direct monetary cash payments to the administration, 9 major so-called big law firms committed a combined $940 million in free pro bono legal services for mutually agreed upon causes. And Boris Epstein was central to all of that, though out of government. And so this new Office of Legal Counsel opinion that extends executive privilege to private connections would shield guys like Epstein from having to testify when, again, probably not if, the Democrats get back in power and investigate things like I just described. Most of the time, executive privilege only goes to those who are in government. Now, the Trump administration is seeking to extend it to those even outside of government. Meanwhile, Judge Jeanine, remember Jeanine Pirro, who the president has appointed as a U.S. attorney, she faces pressure to deliver on cases that Trump wants prosecuted. She's convened a special grand jury, the reason for which is unknown, but its unique power could serve to allow Judge Jeanine to redeem herself from some previous failures to prosecute people that the president wants to see held accountable. Now, Pirro's record in moving against the administration's perceived enemies has been mixed at best. Her office has failed to successfully prosecute a man who was accused of throwing a Subway sandwich at a federal agent. She failed to successfully prosecute 6 Democratic lawmakers who released a video advising service members to reject illegal orders. And she failed to successfully prosecute former Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, whom Trump had accused of mishandling a renovation project. 2 weeks ago, the president suggested that Judge Jeanine's job was in jeopardy after she dismissed charges against a former Olympian who had been accused of vandalizing the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. Now, in general, this is the way grand juries then operate. Their proceedings are secretive. They're a secretive part of the legal process in which prosecutors present evidence and then jurors vote on whether there's evidence to charge someone with a crime. Now, in the case of a grand jury, the legal standard is not the same as when it goes to a criminal jury, which is beyond a reasonable doubt. It just needs to be probable cause, more likely than not. And so it's very easy most often to get what's called an indictment from a grand jury. But a special grand jury has unique characteristics. The 23 members focus on only a single case, whereas a normal grand jury might hear about several cases and return indictments very often on many of those cases. So in the case of a special grand jury, they can focus on a single case or a string of cases that the prosecutors present as being related to each other instead of having to juggle a variety of matters like most grand juries do. And this is important, a special grand jury's ability to issue a report at the end of an investigation sets it apart from just a regular grand jury. They issue a report, and that report can name specific individuals even if prosecutors do not find enough evidence to bring the people to trial, as long as the report shows that there is a preponderance of evidence of wrongdoing. Now, that's a significantly lower standard than the guilt beyond a reasonable doubt that's needed to convict someone. Anyone named in a report has the ability to testify before the special grand jury and present witnesses for their defense. Now, a judge has to, though, sign off on the report before it is publicly released, ensuring that it meets the requirements for citing someone by name. But with that ability to potentially at least issue a report with people's name in it, even if you don't have enough to convict them, when most of the time in our system, that's not permitted because you have, in effect, you've put someone's name out there, but you, in fact, have not been able to prove their guilt. So you've punished them without proving their guilt, which is what this kind of approach can do. And it may be, I don't know, it may be a way to then punish some of those that the president wants punished, but thus far have not been able to do so by bringing charges all the way to a criminal court. Meanwhile, on another matter, President Donald Trump's media company, Truth Social, launched a subscription service called Truth API. Here's what it does. It sells early access to posts on Truth Social from prominent accounts, including the president's. And it does so milliseconds before they reach the general public. So they pay for this service. Subscribers do. They pay up to $100,000 a month. There's a lower price tier, around $60,000 a month. The company has reportedly signed up more than 10 customers, including Wall Street firms and traders, who would seek a head start on market-moving statements. So when the President of the United States puts out these statements anywhere, but very often on Truth Social, and he makes these statements about, the Strait of Hormuz in Iran or the war in general or any other matter, of course, these can move whole markets. They can move millions and millions of dollars. And knowing just a little bit ahead of time when that's going to happen can cause people then to take actions that will protect their money or make more money for them. And so there are legal and ethical concerns, as you might imagine, and a lawsuit has been filed by a media outlet called The Intercept and the Freedom of the Press Foundation against President Trump and his staff, calling this monetization scheme unconstitutional and a violation of First Amendment rights to equal access to public information. Now, these last two are not about corruption, but they are important in our fallen world because they have to do with security in our dangerous world and the importance of a proper legal process. First of all, security in our fallen and dangerous world. President Trump posted on Truth Social, quote, based on my very good relationship with Kim Jong-un of North Korea, I'm not happy with the fact that the United States has long ago agreed to participate in joint military exercises with South Korea. These exercises are not only costly, with much of these costs paid by the United States of America, as usual, but they send a signal that is totally inappropriate and hostile to a country that, as long as Donald J. Trump has been president, has been unthreatening and respectful. Therefore, and based on the fact that it is too late to cancel, I've instructed Secretary of War Pete Hegseth to substantially reduce the joint military exercises. While somewhat unrelated, I recently asked the president of South Korea if they would like to join us in the denuclearization of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and they said no thanks. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Well, this is something that the president has, if you've listened to Discernment Digest at all over these last 8 months, that this is something that the president has pursued for a very long time, that he's sought to weaken in various ways the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, and then with regard to other allies and alliances that we have had for many, many decades, he has, for reasons his own, and they are bewildering to me and to many others, and I bring them up because they are just potentially very dangerous. North Korea has nuclear weapons, and South Korea has been a very reliable ally of ours for years, and with regard to that, helping with the Strait of Hormuz issue, the president has said over and over again, we don't need any help. And then at times he pulls this out and says this country didn't help us when we asked. So it's kind of unclear. Do we need the help? Do we not need the help? And whether we do or we do not, in enhancing the prestige and the reputation of a dictator like Kim Jong-un of North Korea cannot be but a very dangerous thing, in my mind at least. Now, as an example of, on another issue, forcing the executive and legislative branches to do their work within the limits that the Constitution demands, and not, as unfortunately many people believe, perhaps some of our listeners, that this is just liberal Obama or activist judges who don't rule the way we want or the administration wants. You may recall that the Supreme Court recently ruled that the president's order eliminating birthright citizenship violated federal statutes and the Constitution. So the right thing then is for Congress and or the president to change the way that they try to achieve the same or similar result. And I'm happy to report that the Trump administration has taken some action to do that. The Associated Press reports on some new executive orders that the president has issued on this matter of birthright citizenship. The one new order on birthright citizenship, says the AP, is, quote, narrower in scope than the previous one shot down by the Supreme Court, and it appears to focus on restricting automatic citizenship to specific categories of people, including children born to adults with connections to foreign embassies or organizations, as well as anyone considered an alien enemy of the United States. It also aims to restrict birthright citizenship to anyone whose parents engaged in fraudulent activity to obtain citizenship. And then there's a second order that, quote, seeks to curb what Trump called birth tourism by increasing restrictions on visitors to the United States who want to obtain visas to give birth while in the country. So just as a personal matter, seems quite reasonable to me, but whether it's reasonable to me is really neither here nor there. It is the right process. That if something is unconstitutional, as this birthright citizenship order that had been previously issued was deemed to be by our Supreme Court, then the proper process is to do what's happening here, and we'll see if this holds up under constitutional scrutiny. Now, a little comic relief before I look at a final issue. Ask that question, does your surgeon need to be a Christian? Most of you know who Candace Owens is, and hopefully you know enough not to listen to a syllable that she says. Well, she recently debated a guy named Andrew Wilson, who is a Christian conservative political commentator. He's a live streamer, and he's an experienced online debater. He's best known for hosting his own online debate platform called The Crucible and running an educational program called Debate University. Well, that all sounds impressive, except I really do question the wisdom of lending any credibility to Candace Owens by taking the time to debate her. But he did, and it was on the issue of the facts surrounding Charlie Kirk's murder. But I have to say I agree with one poster who humorously listed things I'd rather do than watch Candace Owens and Andrew Wilson debate. First one is eat gas station sushi from a place where the bathroom requires a key attached to a hubcap. Or get a root canal during a fire drill. Have my leg amputated with no anesthesia while someone explains cryptocurrency to me. Lick the handrail at a Greyhound station. Sit through a 6-hour homeowners association meeting about acceptable mailbox beige. Assemble IKEA furniture using only the Swedish instructions and a butter knife. Step on a Lego every morning for the rest of my natural life. Use airport Wi-Fi to refinance my mortgage. Walk barefoot across a Waffle House, they said, for us in Southeast Michigan, maybe a Denny's or an IHOP. Walk barefoot across a Waffle House parking lot at 3 a.m. Explain a printer problem to my mother over FaceTime. Have my toenails removed while a podcast bro explains why civilization collapsed when women got checking accounts. Spend an entire weekend at a timeshare presentation. Eat oysters from a vending machine. have a kidney stone during jury duty, fight a Canadian goose with one hand tied behind my back. All right. A couple of comments about conspiracy theories and drawing conclusions hastily when, in fact, we could be more moderate in our viewpoint and the way we state it. As an example of that, one commented about the Luigi Mangione prosecution. Remember, he's the guy who shot United Healthcare CEO in the back and murdered him. This was a husband and a father, but amazingly, Mangione became a hero to some people who hate our healthcare system. And then it's also about Tyler Robinson, the assassin of Charlie Kirk. And this commentator said the insane left believed Luigi Mangione was innocent, and the insane right believed Tyler Robinson was innocent. In both, it was emotion, not reason, that got them there, and they cannot be reasoned out of what they emoted themselves into. I think that's well said. And then kind of related to not jumping to conclusions and things you cannot prove, because of the whole Fauci thing that's come up within the last month and his testimony where he pled the Fifth Amendment and wouldn't really testify. He did that over 100 times before Congress. With all of that, the leak of the COVID virus in China, and in particular in Wuhan, China, has come again to the fore, and the debate that's gone on for years about whether that happened, not in Wuhan, everyone agrees it happened, it originated there, but from a market, an open market there, or in the laboratory that is located there. And the lab leak theory has gained momentum. It may well be true. I have no trouble with either one of them being true. And I bring it up for this reason. They are examples of keeping your options open on what it is you do not know. And I wrote this in 2021 when this debate was really, really going strong. Actually, I think it was in 2020. And I said, I'm a conspiracy theorist, but not in the way so many while away their time searching for inside knowledge that will reveal who was on the grassy knoll at Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963, or the connection between Ruby Ridge, Waco, and the Murrah Building in Oklahoma City, the calculations that prove, in quotes, the fall of Building 7 at the World Trade Center was an inside job, or the machinations of the Chinese government's attempt to disrupt the world system by unleashing a deadly virus on its own people and then on us. I said, I believe there's more than we're told about a wet market in Wuhan, China, randomly setting off the pandemic we're now enduring, or alternatively, a virology laboratory in that same town intentionally doing so. Now, notice just the way I did that. I was tongue-in-cheek talking about all these conspiracy theories, and then simply said, look, we don't know how the virus has originated. There seems to be a consensus, almost universal, that it came from Wuhan. But was it from a wet market? Was it from the lab? We don't know. And the way I worded that is an example of keeping your options open. You haven't committed yourself to either one of those, because the truth of the matter is I didn't know. I don't know for sure now either. And no one can go back and look at what I've said and say, you claimed X and it turned out to be Y. And I think discernment for us means always finding ourselves in that kind of position. And now last, I asked the question, does your surgeon need to be a Christian? It was the early church leader Tertullian of Carthage who famously asked the probing question, what indeed has Athens to do with Jerusalem? The question arises because there's always a tension that exists for Christians seeking to follow the Lord's claim that we're in the world, not of the world, in John chapter 17. 2,000 years later, the perennial question remains, how should Christians relate to the unbelievers around them? For centuries, tension between the biblical realities of God's good creation and the world's corruption have caused Christians to debate the proper biblical approach to non-Christians. Theologian Michael Horton summarizes the conflict well. It was confusing to grow up singing both "This is not my home" and "This is my Father's world." Those hymns embody two common and seemingly contradictory Christian responses to culture. One sees this world as a wasteland of godlessness with which the Christian should have as little as possible to do. The other regards cultural transformation as virtually identical to kingdom activity. Well, the precise relationship between the Christian and non-Christian has many facets, but there are two biblical concepts that can help guide our thinking on this matter. The first is general revelation. The Bible teaches that all people possess some knowledge of God, that He exists, that He's the Creator, that He has standards of right and wrong, Romans 1, chapters 1 and 2. Though unbelievers suppress their knowledge of God, according to Romans 1:18, they cannot escape its influence. Living on the borrowed capital of the biblical worldview, they can and do communicate insights that are both true and beneficial. Therefore, Scripture sometimes commends the thoughts of non-Christians by quoting them. For example, in the Apostle Paul's famous proclamation to philosophers in Athens, he quoted two non-believers to buttress his point that we are all responsible to our Creator. Paul said, "In Him we live and move and have our being," and that's from a Cretan poet, Epimenides. And he also said, did Paul, "We are His offspring." And that's a line from Aratus' work, Phenomenina. So there's general revelation. And then the second truth that helps us in our relationship to non-Christians and how we see their contributions is that of common grace. God's common grace mitigates the effects of sin that would otherwise overwhelm and direct the use of unbelievers' abilities. Instead, these are often used for human flourishing, and we all benefit. Though non-Christian motivation is never for the right purpose, namely the glory of God, they nevertheless often behave in the right way. That is, although those outside Christ never pursue ultimate good, they can and do often perform relative good. And so we should then choose excellence from wherever it comes. And I was reminded, I say, of these truths recently when I wrote this several years ago, when I had a cordial disagreement with a pastor friend about the coronavirus and its best treatment. He was of the opinion that the seriousness of the virus had been overblown and the vaccines offered are not the best remedy. I disagreed with those conclusions, but I was most concerned about some of the reasoning that he expressed. With regard to the treatment, he was convinced that the recommendations of the mainstream medical community should not be trusted because it's dominated by non-Christians. Instead, he advocated for medicine suggested by a small group of doctors whose primary spokeswoman is a Christian. I had written about her previously and the group that she represented the year prior to that discussion with my pastor friend, and I reminded him that she is a bit, weird and out there, and I gave him the evidence. I won't bore you with it here, but if you care to Google, you can. Her name is Dr. Stella Emanuel. Dr. Stella Emanuel. You'll be shocked at what you see. And he admitted that she has some strange religious ideas, but the fact that she's a professing Christian held sway. So she's a Christian, therefore she's a better doctor in his mind. And I would suggest to you, based upon general revelation and common grace, that is absolutely not true. Years ago in our area here in Southeast Michigan, there was a asphalt paving company, and here was the name of the company, Ron's Christian Asphalt Paving. Ron's Christian Asphalt Paving. Now, I remember seeing the advertisements for that and then doing a double take. Was it Ron Christians? Was that his name, Ron Christian? But I looked, and no, it's Ron's, so the possessive is on Ron's, not on Christian. Ron's Christian. And so Christian is a modifier. And so Ron is his name. Christian is the type of asphalt paving company he has. Ron's Christian Asphalt Paving. And the truth of the matter is there's no such thing as Christian asphalt paving. There's asphalt paving that's done by a Christian or a non-Christian, but the paving can be good or bad, whether it's done by a Christian or a non-Christian, and you should choose according to excellence. So are Christians better doctors? or mechanics or engineers or whatever. When President Ronald Reagan underwent surgery to remove a would-be assassin's bullet, he famously quipped to those in the operating room, "I hope you're all Republicans." Now, of course, he was kidding, but when a believer undergoes surgery, does he need to ask whether the medical staff are all Christians? I would suggest that rather than asking if the surgeon is a Christian, you instead determine whether she has proven skill. And if she does, and she is a non-Christian, she will presumably apply her expertise to your benefit, but not for God's glory. But you can praise him anyway, because the truth is, in him she lives and moves and has her being, as the Apostle Paul said to those philosophers on Mars Hill in Athens, Greece. Well, if you have any questions or comments, you can send those to discern@cbctrenton.com. I hope you can listen again next Monday. In the meantime, have a great week serving and discerning.